Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is Orphan Last, aka Skylar Madison, and today I'm going to go ahead and critique some artwork inside of Monster MD. The artwork from this comic book is from Maccagni. If I'm pronouncing any of these names incorrectly, I'm sorry. The colors are done by Tanya, Wicker, and the lettering is done by Eric Weathers, written and created by Klaus. Now, of course, the main person that I'm going to be critiquing inside of this video is Maccagni. Now, when I say critique, all of this is positive. I love his work. I've been talking to Klaus for quite a long time on Twitter. Kind of a long-lasting like friendship going on there. Okay, so here's the cover of the comic book. Right here. It establishes kind of the artistic style, the two main characters right here and right here. Awesome. I do like the cross-hatching here. This is something that I've never been able to master, and this kind of strange pattern going on here. I can't say I really understand why people do that, but it looks good. Like I said, I've never really mastered cross-hatching. It's not something that I've ever put an emphasis on. One thing that I've noticed that a lot of artists do, especially in comic books when they want to draw something like a bat or a bird, they oftentimes just kind of draw out things like the silhouette of them, and you know, if they want to kind of include a little bit more of the anatomy, it's still a silhouette. And you know, this allows you to have a stylistic look, and it also allows you to convey information rather quickly without having to do a lot of work. And you know, when you're popping out comic books left and right, then you gotta be able to meet your deadline and such like that. And now style is something that I kind of want to talk about a little bit, because everyone always seems to use style as, especially newbies, they use style as an excuse for why their artwork doesn't look very good. The thing is style is when you are reducing detail and kind of playing around with proportions and stuff like that in order to make an image look more appealing, and oftentimes in order to meet a deadline. When someone is a newbie, it's not that they're reducing detail and manipulating proportions to make an interesting looking image. It's more that they didn't see the detail and they didn't see the proportions, and it doesn't look more appealing. And so when a newbie winds up making an excuse, oh, that's just my style, it doesn't fly, it doesn't work. So I do like the color work here. Really nice touch right there, and none of that was really drawn. I'm pretty sure. It's really interesting. The character evidently has like some sort of like a zombie arm, something like that. That looks interesting. But of course, you know, as the bats get closer, that's when they start to get more fleshed out. And that's nice to see. It's nice to see that someone actually drew out a bat properly. Kind of a Dr. Frankenstein looking technology going on here. Just stuff that I'm noticing here. Kind of trying to give you guys an idea as to what you're in for with the comic book, and that's the purpose of a cover. Kind of strange that the liquid is tilted this way, yet the actual bottle is tilted that way. Kind of a green potion sort of bottle with smoke. Kind of gives the impression that there's a lot of magic going on inside of this comic book. Kind of an almost empty page here. We got some sort of logo here. Evil needs a checkup, Monster MD. You know, an uncolored, just ink image of one of the panels inside of the comic book. It looks like the line work, it's been kind of diffused into a shade of gray, kind of stylistically. I'll get into talking about this panel when I get to it. Alright, so we get a panel right here that's all black. Okay, now here's something first that I kind of want to talk about that's kind of interesting. Okay, so we have the full page right here, and yet there's this large gutter going on here, all throughout here, of negative space, just shaded in black. The gutters themselves are black for every panel. It looks like they weren't actually drawn out, the gutters, because this surgical light, it actually goes right through here. So these are just, it looks like these are layers placed on top. Even though this first panel right here is completely covered in black on the outside of it here. You'll notice that there is like, it's not pure white. It looks more like a green. Actually, let me confirm that. What color is this? Okay, so it looks like, yeah, it's definitely a green, almost a light blue color, almost fully desaturated, and rather, actually, that is rather dark. Let's make sure I got the right color select. Okay, so this is the one that's standing out the most, but it's actually kind of two colors. There's this one to the left and this one to the right of it. I'm thinking this was the color that was intended. That's interesting. Yeah, it's just a green color. So the panel has a border, all right? And it's all in black, very stylistic. One thing that I do find interesting is how sometimes you'll have text, you know, inside of this comic book, and then you'll have this text bubble wrapping around the text, especially for dramatic things. It is kind of unique to see this weird shape going on with the lettering. I guess that's to communicate pain, agony, almost losing consciousness, which is interesting, and they do the same thing down here. And yes, it's gory, it's kind of bloody and stuff like that. I'm sorry about that, but most of my audience is 30 years old, so I don't think I need to apologize for there being blood inside of the comic strip. I am kind of curious about something here. I'm like, how picky was the perspective? I'm like, this is an interesting comic book in that it's got a really stylistic look, and it does kind of get me to wonder how meticulous was the artist in making the perspective. This was a 1-point perspective image. The horizon line would be something like up here, maybe up here. No, actually no. That's where the actual horizon would be. The actual horizon would be something like up here, but the actual horizon line, which represents down, would be something like, if I follow these lines down, okay, so the actual horizon line is right about here-ish, which is kind of interesting. So that's a way of looking down. Here, let me demonstrate real quick here. Let me draw out this here. So basically, this gurney here would just basically be, well, wait, this is a 2-point perspective image. So the second point, the second vanishing point would be something like up here, actually, because, you know, all of these lines are going like that. What I think is kind of cool about it is that even though it's just guy on a gurney, you know, the artist decided to include all of these folds in the cloth, and even included like all of this detail, little dots, little swirlies going on the floor. Okay, so we just have a panel of a close-up of the doctor putting on his rubber gloves. He straps in the patient. Yeah, really not much to really draw with the background here. There's no background in this panel, this panel, this panel, this panel, and though one is kind of implied with these lights here, there's no background here. So there's only one panel on this entire page that actually has a background, and it's this one right here. Close up on the doctor's mouth before we actually see the doctor in full. And I think it's kind of cool. He's got like this logo of what looks like a band. Could very well have said Metallica right there. But it's got a lot more, you know, it's got a bunch of upside down crosses, which implies a bunch of, you know, demon worship sort of thing. I like the lens flares. I don't think those were drawn, and I gotta give props to the colorist for that. I am kind of surprised that there isn't more light radiating out, to be honest. I'm kind of surprised something like that wasn't done. I know that this is a little bit too much exposure, and of course I think I just have the JPEG image, and so I'm kind of really washing out this stuff here and kind of making it look weird. But if I had access to the actual original, I could manage to not do that. But I'm also moving really quick here inside of this video. I'm actually kind of surprised because with the amount of light that this sort of stuff usually outputs, you would think that there would be just a flood of light. You would think that, especially, I don't know, I'm thinking about it, it's just, you know, usually these lights used by doctors are like really bright, so why wouldn't this be a super bright scene? To me it kind of feels like, and of course this is kind of artist's choice. I'm not really saying, oh, this image is terrible because they made a different choice than what I would have done. Maybe it's just because, you know, this isn't really bright up here. You know, this wasn't made bright, but maybe it was like with the lights on suddenly right here. If that was the case, maybe that would just add more dramatic effect, I think. Once again, we have another page, and we have an interesting use of negative space, okay? We have all this negative space up here, and we have all this negative space here. Now, he could have very easily have just had a, he could have very easily have made his whole comic book page be something like, you know, this would be the comic book page right here, and then had 2 panels up here, a thin panel here, a taller panel, and then a short panel here. But look at how interesting it looks with the negative space. Now, like this panel right here would be this panel here, but having it not be like this, and having it more like this right here, where it's actually smaller, not only kind of gives you a little bit less to work with, but it actually makes it better to look at. It gives you more to look at. Gives you more motion in the scene as well. I really do like this right here. We got kind of like, you see that these, if you follow the line with the top of these seats here, or at least, oh yeah, his hospital is in the back of his van. So like, we got a bit of a Dutch angle. So this would be the steering wheel right here. So we got a Dutch angle, and it looks as though the perspective, let's try to follow the perspective here and try to find where lines start to collide. Okay, right there. So the Dutch angle would be something like right here-ish. Actually, I think the Dutch angle is going along with the this front portion of the gurney here. That's where the horizon line is. So 1 point perspective was used here. How many? Okay, so once again, there is only 1 panel on the entire page with the background, which is kind of cool. I really do like the lighting, even though it seems like it's possibly not bright enough. Maybe that's the optimal lighting for working on monsters. Green diffused sort of lighting. I don't know. Too much of a fan of this panel right here, but in my mind, you can get away with, you know, a few panels that don't wind up being ideal. And once again, we have a panel that could have very easily have taken up this whole space right here, but instead it allows for there to be negative space, adds motion and emotion to the scene. It feels a very stylistic look, and you know, I halfway feel as though the doctor should be freaking out here, but I'm looking at him and it kind of seems like, oh, he bit my arm, and maybe that's intended. But it's interesting. One thing of note that's interesting is how, like, this is something that I noticed first from Todd McFarlane, making a red border around really loud, threatening sounds, which would be this right here. That would be the loud, threatening sound. Roar! Crunch, with little blood splatter going on that's clipped inside of the text. That's an interesting touch. Okay, so once again, we have another page that very easily could have been, like this page very easily could have been just a page where it had 2 panels like that, 3 panels like that, and yeah, this could have very easily have been the page layout. And this is something that you would have seen, this layout right here. That's how you would have seen what was created on this page if it was like back when Jack Kirby and Stan Lee were still around together making comic books. This would be the standard, the gold standard technique of doing it. Very rarely did I see Jack Kirby or any other comic book artist around that time make anything like this, where instead, you know, once again, you know, this panel right here, it's kind of a gray area. So like not even having a panel border here allows an interesting little transition visually towards the bottom panel. It kind of ties the composition together a little bit. Also, if this panel right here were to have a border, like it would have actually decreased the appeal in this panel, because like it's just interesting how, you know, this shape right here, this abstract shape that's probably like that, and it's taller than this. It adds an extra something to the image that breaks it up from just being boring square panels on the page. And there is not even a single background drawn on this page. That's not a criticism, that's just something I noticed. Looks like he punches his patient. One thing that I've kind of noticed is that this artist doesn't do motion lines very often. Like normally there would be like motion lines or something, which, you know, that's not a critique or anything. I think motion lines are stupid. I kind of do feel as though maybe a motion blur, maybe the colorist could have possibly done a motion blur that could have made this look more interesting. And by motion blur, what I'm talking about is maybe the colorist could have maybe grabbed this. I'm gonna just copy it and paste it, and let me press Control D and go blur, motion blur. Let's apply that, and let's go ahead and lower its opacity a bit. Now that right there, I think would have been interesting to look at. I mean, either way, I mean what's actually on the page and what I would suggest are both good. I feel creative differences, those are fine, but I just feel as though this would have added a bit more motion going on, something that would have added, it would have helped add a little bit of clarity. Of course, it doesn't necessarily need more clarity. I feel as though a motion blur like this also would have made the whack sound effect less necessary, if that makes sense. If we could just see the motion blur going on here, that would have decreased the need for stereotypical imagery inside of comic books. Nothing wrong with stereotypical sort of comic book imagery and stuff like that. It's just, instead of a motion blur, they decided to go with a whack, whereas vice versa would have been just fine. Alright, so moving on towards this page. I love the foreshortening here. I love the expressiveness of the character. Now, this is, you know, drawing in a cartoony style is something that I personally have. Like, I know I have my own cartoony style, but like this is a style that interests me, that actually has a lot of flexibility to it, to where it can transfer over to becoming more and more stylistic, or more and more realistic, and even become even more cartoony, to the point where on a panel or two it can start to kind of look not quite as bad, but well, I would say a little bit more like something you would expect from Steven Universe. So it's got a lot of versatility, the look of this comic book. Okay, so it looks like his patient falls over and turns into a werewolf, which is awesome. So how to zoom in on a scene. Okay, now, so you have this whole image right here, and you know, they very well have made, I don't know, he very well may have copied this layer right here, pasted it here, lowered its opacity and scaled it up, made it bigger, and then, you know, treated it like an onion skin of, okay, well, that now he's transforming into a werewolf. And so he draws a keyframe of him turning into a werewolf, and then he you know, he goes ahead and he grabs these, you know, like this portion of it, copies it and pastes it over here. But the thing is the angle here is much wider. It would have wound up like this. So he probably just grabbed this jaw and brought them in so that they're not angled so much, brought them in closer, and kind of, you know, freshened up the lines a little bit. At least looking it over, this is me kind of backward engineering the comic book page after it's finished. And I'm looking at it and I'm asking myself, how would I have made it to look like this if I knew that this was going to be the end result? And this is how the workflow I would do after knowing what the image looks like after the fact. I think it's interesting. Here he does this whole uppercut thing, and it's not a motion blur, but it's, you know, the eye has some lighting, like it glows in the dark, and it's streaking like that, which is cool. Let me experiment with this a little bit. Copy, paste, and filter, blur, motion blur. I don't know. I'm playing around with motion blurs here. Does that work? Maybe this blur doesn't. I don't think that one does. Maybe if it was just this right portion of the teeth and seriously reduced, maybe that would have been better. I don't know. Again, I'm not saying how it should have been done. I'm just saying how I would probably go about doing the exact same thing. Personally, if there is any way for me to avoid a wham, I would try to avoid it. That's my personal taste. No one else has to share that point of view, but I like how this looks. That's one of the main reasons why I'm critiquing it. Okay, so let's take a look at this panel. Once again, I'm seeing a little bit of a running trend here, okay? So on this panel, looking over the negative space, we have, like negative space up here, negative space down here. We go to this panel and we have negative space all through here for the most part, and then we go to this panel and we have negative space up here and negative space down here, and so it's very common for this artist to have a lot of liberal use of basically a border that uses up the sides of the page quite a bit, pure blackness, which I'm totally down with. I think that works. Okay, so with this panel right here, once again, the whole panel could have very easily have been just a page with two panels up here and then it's split down in the middle, but it looks like it's more than that with the black border, the black negative space going on there, which I think is cool. So, well, no, I guess this is on camera. Shump. Okay, this is something that I miss when I'm looking over it. This is when a motion blur would have been really helpful here. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a whole lot of motion blur like it is on this arm and hand, but what I really do feel would have improved this would have been just a few motion blurs. I mean, that communicates to me, he is pushing that thing right on there. And you can generate that effect the exact same way that I'm generating that effect. I would just export the image and then just place that exported image with all of the layers flattened all into one image, and just make selections and cut that out of that exported image inside of your actual coloring file, and just cut out pieces of it, then turn it off on your stacking order, and then the little parts that you've cut out, turn those back on and just blur them, like blur different sections of it in different layers, the exact same way that I'm doing it. I would export it as a PNG personally. One thing that I think is interesting is how oftentimes the line artist will add these weird little squiggly doos, like a squiggly do right there. And I noticed that every once in a while, just a totally random, like, I guess it's to communicate where he wants shadow, but you go up here and it's like, well, I guess that is a transition from highlight here to shadow, because shadow's right here. I don't know. Looks good. Okay, so this page. Okay, so it looks like two backgrounds are drawn on this page. What I find interesting about this is, you see pentagrams, you see some sort of diagram, needle, a syringe. Who knows what else is down there? It looks like almost an envelope here, but I'm not really quite sure what that is. Little touches of detail. Okay, some sort of pamphlet with a cross on it. We have some sort of book. Maybe it's a medical journal and it's got some sort of, some sort of symbol on there. Maybe it's an ancient symbol. I don't know how much research went into making this comic book. Once again, this is a 1-point perspective image. The horizon line would be something like right here-ish, I think. Let me double check that. Let me just go ahead and pull that line and pull this line right there. Okay, so the horizon line is right here, and we know where the vanishing point is because, I just went ahead and pulled it. What I find interesting is how, like, the perspective in here, although there is clarity with the perspective, it looks like the artist, he draws backgrounds the same way as I do, I think, where he just kind of freehands it. It looks really good, but I think he does it a lot more stylistic than I do. Whereas I'm trying to it's hard to really articulate because I'm not going for 100% realism, but I'm picky about things when I don't necessarily have to be, if that makes sense. I really like this panel right here. We got water, we got rocks in the water. Really like the trees, how he renders trees. They look really good. Just the trees are nothing but silhouettes. Notice that, okay? And the water, other than like a few little dots here and stuff, and like these open areas here, the water is just black. Most of it is black. And inside of the highlights, the color artist went ahead and put in all the rest of the details there. It looks really good. Normally you don't use perspective for landscapes. It just gets in the way. There are occasions when you might use it, but yeah, I mean, this is just pretty much like the silhouette of the bus. So there isn't, like, if the vanishing point had been here, then yeah, you know, you would have wound up having to draw out all of this other stuff going on in order to get it to work in perspective. And, you know, with how much stuff is up here, I can understand why the artist decided to go with this. And plus, this probably looks better than anything you could come up with if you had the vanishing point elsewhere. Having it smack dab right here where, you know, you don't really, or actually it's probably right here, where you're not going to be drawing any perspective lines. This is probably the best composition for this page. I like how the colorist, you know, you got this, and the silhouettes of these trees are kind of being diffused by the lighting of the moon here. I really like that. Let me play around with this a little bit. Like, I know that, like, I'm picky with my line work, and I would hope that people wouldn't wind up kind of distorting it at all, but the whole point of the line work is to help tell the story. So to me, doing a motion blur like this would be totally cool, totally fine with me. Again, like, well, you know, having the thump there in this case isn't a bad thing at all. I think that's fine, but like having a little bit extra something to communicate, there is some motion going on here. Personally, I like the whatever that is right there. It looks like, you know, it looks like someone tagged the wall there, which kind of looks cool. I like it. They live. This isn't like the most amazing panel in the world. I mean, you know, there's negative space all throughout here, but this is the credits. This is where you get to see who made the comic strip. Yeah, I really like the simplicity and the minimalism here. You know, you have just one door from the actual van. The sun looks a little bit weird. It looks like a solid object rather than a sunrise, but you still get the idea that it's a sunrise. And, you know, a whole bunch of silhouettes for trees, and just a few little pew 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 with your line work, and you got a nice grassy field going on there. And then the color artist goes ahead and improves upon what you've drawn. Very good panel. I like that. Not too much of a fan of how the flame is. It looks as though this panel was drawn, copied, and then pasted, and then, you know, used as somewhat of a onion skin for another keyframe. Just, you know, it's pretty much the same picture, except, you know, his fingers are wider, his eyes are open, and the cigarette is over there, like that, with some motion lines. And of course, you know, the clouds or you know, the imagery of wind, I guess, is different than on this panel here. I mean, look at that. It's exactly what I said. I'm pretty sure that's exactly how it was done. I just literally copied this panel here and moved it over here. That's all I did just now. I almost absolutely guarantee you that's exactly how it is. Like, even these tree branches are identical. So it's a good little, and this isn't a criticism. This is how a comic book is made, okay? So there's no criticism going on here. I'd like to make that clear. And even when I do criticize, it's not like me saying, oh, people have to do it my way. I mean, when I say, hey, this is just how I would prefer the information being communicated, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be communicated that way. I've seen plenty of other artists do great work doing something completely differently than how I would have done it. Okay, so I love this panel. It looks awesome. Okay, here's some cool stuff. Like, this could have very easily have just been a very boring page where, you know, this is the page right here, okay? And then we have a panel up here, like we have this panel here, and this panel here, okay? So maybe space them out a little bit. So that could have very easily have been this page. But if I may be allowed to use the same terms that I have been using in the previous video in the series here, we have a capital panel here, okay? We call that the capital panel. This is the first time we see the Invisible Woman, okay? So it justifies having capital. Let me see if other pages have a capital. Yeah, this one where, you know, he's howling at the ceiling, this would qualify as being in capital, which gives you the feeling of, I don't know, maybe insanity, because he's acting kind of strange there. But anyways, and of course, you know, his hair kind of exceeds outside. You know, he's got negative space here, all through here, except for where his head punches out of the panel. And I like it when that happens. Like, I think on page 1 he did that. Yeah, this right here was really well done, where his head just, you know, it's outside of the panel like that. And it's a Dutch angle as well, which really kind of grabs your eye. I like it when people do that. People say do it sparingly, and yeah, do it sparingly, but try to find ways of using it because it's awesome. Like normally, personally, I wouldn't render smoke like that. I mean, I guess this could be smoke. I know it's smoke. I mean, it's obviously a cigarette right there, and the invisible woman has smoke in her lungs, which I think it's a creative way of drawing smoke, but it's definitely not how I would have. I'm kind of surprised that I don't see, like, the imprint of her teeth either. I'm kind of surprised about that, like, the inverted bit of her teeth and the negative space of her mouth entirely right there. It's just, you know, throat, lungs, but you know, it works with the style. I would like to see that. I remember watching Chevy Chase play the Invisible Man when I was a little kid, and I thought, whoa, you know, whenever he drinks something, or I think there was even a part where he smoked, I'm not sure, and he even ate something, and he looked in the mirror, and you saw all the food inside of his intestines, and it grossed him out, and then he puked it out. That I don't know, it stuck out to me as being really cool. So whenever I see something like this, I'm thinking of Chevy Chase playing the Invisible Man. I like how the line work is being influenced by the lighting right there. That's cool. I think the line work is even being influenced throughout here too. It's a really nice touch. I like it. Once again, we have silhouettes of trees going on here. Are those the same kind of trees though? Yeah, they're the same kind of trees. Kind of weird that the trees that are up close though, the trees that are up close are more branchy. And they don't have much foliage though, but that does happen in nature. That's not a negative criticism. Every single panel except for this one has a background, but look at how simple it is. It's just a line, a few little scratches to indicate that it's grass, silhouettes of trees, and then the color artist goes ahead and adds all the flourish to the ground and the sky and stuff like that. Not really much work went into that, at least for the guy drawing it. And here it's just, you know, a couple of silhouettes of tree branches and such like that, and you know, a little bit of I would say 2-point perspective. This looks like 2-point perspective going on for the van. I like the curved lines. At one moment it's curved to the left, and then it's curved to the right, yet the center, like if this is the north vanishing point, if this was curved linear perspective, it wouldn't do that. This is linear perspective, but I would love to see this artist draw a curved linear perspective for a comic book. That would be so cool. If you guys want to know what I'm talking about, in the upper right corner of the screen right here, there's going to be a card that leads to a video where at the very end of it, I actually pan across a background that I drew. It's not one of my best videos, but like it does kind of portray exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so I actually have a bunch more pages that I can go through, and I will in a separate video in due time. This video has just ran its course. It's 30 plus minutes, and so it's time to call it a day. I hope you guys have enjoyed this so far, and I look forward to continuing to edit this footage together in order to show you guys a little bit more of a critique, just me kind of reverse engineering, kind of trying to figure out how the comic strip was made, and my hypotheses, and giving my suggestions, stuff like that. I'm enjoying it. I've actually wanted to talk to the artist of this for quite some time, and I actually have just started because of this, which is awesome. Anyways, guys, if you've enjoyed this video, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. And if you guys would like to get more notifications from me, feel free to click on the bell, or go ahead and follow me on Twitter, or go ahead and join my Discord server. A link to Twitter and Discord is in the video description below. And if you'd like to support this channel, there's an image of my mascot in the upper right corner of the screen right now. It leads to my Patreon, and any support would be much appreciated. And if you've enjoyed this content and would like to see more, feel free to click on anything else that's appearing on the screen right now. Thank you very much for your time.